The year the Nile rose poorly. Everyone in Nakht's village understood the danger before a single word was spoken. No one needed a priest to interpret it. No scribe had to write it down. The river itself had said enough. When the flood had come, it had spread across the low fields, as it always did, but not with the same strength. The water had seemed thinner, more hesitant, as if it no longer trusted the land. And when it withdrew, it left behind a skin of dark silt, too shallow to promise a good harvest. Nakht noticed it first in the mornings, while walking barefoot between the narrow ridges of his field. In a generous year, the earth was soft underfoot. In this one, it was already beginning to harden. He lived in a small village south of Memphis, in a mud brick house with a reed roof. His wife Henut, their son Teti, and Henut's mother, who remembered 3 rains and measured time, not in years, but in flood seasons. The family owned little: a patch of land, a few tools, jars for grain, baskets, a grinding stone, a sleeping mat, a low stool, a copper knife carefully wrapped when not in use. They had enough in ordinary years. In lean ones, enough became a memory. One evening, as Henut ground grain more slowly than usual, Nakht sat near the doorway and repaired a basket handle. "You are listening to the jars," she said. Nakht looked up. "What?" "You keep turning your head toward them." He smiled faintly. "And what do they say?" "That they are not as full as you want them to be." She was right. Every household in the village was counting. Grain, oil, dried onions, time. The officials arrived 3 days later. They came after dawn, when the air was still cool and most people were already outside. There were 4 of them, in linen cleaner than any cloth in the village, and with them a scribe carrying a writing pallet and a rolled sheet of papyrus. The village headman bowed before they even spoke. Nakht knew what such visits meant: royal labor. The official announced that men would be taken north for service on the king's great project at Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. Some would shape stone, some would carry supplies. Some would join hauling teams. They would be assigned by age, strength, and need. There was no shouting, no panic, only the familiar silence of people doing sums in their heads. If a man went, his family lost his labor. If he did not go, the household lost access to what the state could provide. For poor families, the choice often did not feel like a choice. That afternoon, Nakht sat with Henut outside their house, while Teddy traced lines in the dust with a stick. "Will it be far?" the boy asked. "Yes," said Nakht. "Farther than Uncle's village?" "Yes." "Will you see the king?" Nakht laughed. "No. Men like me do not simply walk up to the king." Teti considered this seriously. "Then how will he know you are helping him?" Nakht had no answer ready. In the end, he said, "Because the stone will know." Henut turned to him after the boy ran off. "Do you want to go?" He thought for a moment. "No. Will you?" "Yes." She nodded once, not because she was satisfied, but because she already understood. On the morning of departure, she packed him bread, a strip of dried fish, and a linen wrap. Her mother tucked a small amulet into the bundle without comment. Teddy stood very straight, trying to seem older than he was. Nakht put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Look after your mother." Teddy lifted his chin. "I will." Henut smiled at that, though her eyes did not. The journey north took several days. The men traveled in groups along the river road, joining others from nearby villages. Some were farmers, some fishermen, some laborers accustomed to carrying loads, others younger men leaving home for the first time. They traded names, stories, bits of bread, and rumors. One had heard that the king's workers ate meat on feast days. Another said there were whole bakeries near the royal works. Another claimed the pyramid itself shone so brightly in the sun that birds mistook it for water. By the second day, Nakht had decided that half the stories were exaggerations and the other half were probably too small. Then he saw it. At first, it appeared as an unnatural line against the pale distance. Then, as the road rose, the shape became clear, vast, angular, deliberate. The pyramid did not emerge like a hill or a cliff. It seemed instead to declare itself, as if a thought had been turned into stone. The men around him fell quiet. Nakht had built walls, repaired granaries, dug ditches, raised small storage huts, helped neighbors set roof beams. He knew what human labor looked like. He knew what 10 men could do, what 20 could do, what a season could do. This was beyond any measure he knew. Closer to the plateau, the world became busier. Donkey trains passed carrying sacks and jars. Men led cattle. Sledges creaked. Stone blocks lay in ordered rows. Dust hung in the air. Overseers moved from group to group. Everywhere there was direction, purpose, repetition. But the greatest surprise was not the pyramid. It was the town beside it. Nakht had expected makeshift shelters and weary men sleeping wherever there was ground. Instead, he found long mud brick galleries, courtyards, storage areas, workshops, cooking spaces, and rows of bread molds drying in the sun. There was movement everywhere, but it was orderly movement. Water jars stood where they were needed. Grain was stored in quantity. Men carried fuel, flour, baskets of fish, bundles of rope. This was not merely a work site. It was a place built to keep work going. A scribe took Nakht's name, village, and crew assignment. Another official checked his shoulders and hands with the practical eye of someone judging oxen, though not unkindly. He was led to sleeping quarters with other new arrivals and told where to collect his ration. When the bread was placed in his hands, warm, coarse, fragrant, Nakht stared at it for a moment before eating. An older worker beside him noticed. "First day? Yes. You'll get used to the scale of things." Nakht looked around. "Do you?" The man smiled. "No, but you learn where your place is in it." That night, lying on a reed mat in a room full of unfamiliar breathing, Nakht listened to the sounds of the settlement outside. Steps, voices, distant animals, a jar set down, a laugh. Somewhere farther off, the scraping drag of wood on prepared ground. He had left his fields behind. Ahead of him waited stone, labor, and a world larger than any he had imagined. And for the first time in many months, beneath all his uncertainty, there was something else too: curiosity. Nakht's first lesson at Giza was simple. A stone block did not move because one man was strong. It moved because many men learned to act as if they were one body. Before sunrise, the settlement was already awake. Fires glowed low near the bakeries. Teams collected tools. Men washed quickly, tightened linen kilts, and ate in groups before reporting to their crews. The air was cool for a short while, and everyone used that hour well. Nakht received bread, onions, and beer, thick enough to count as food. He had expected hunger at a royal worksite. Instead, he found planning. His hauling crew was led by a man called Penray, broad-shouldered, calm, and efficient. He did not shout unless there was reason. He walked the line of new men and looked at each as if making a quiet calculation. "When the sled starts," he said, "do not pull with your arms alone. Lean with your whole body. Keep time with the men beside you. If you try to be stronger than the team, you become weaker than it." The block assigned to them rested on a heavy wooden sledge. It was limestone, roughly squared, not yet part of the polished outer casing that would one day define the monument's skin. but large enough that Nakht could not imagine it moving any great distance. Before the crew took hold of the ropes, workers in front began pouring water over the sand in a steady line. Nakht watched closely. Penray noticed. Good. Watch everything. Why the water? Nakht asked. To help the sled travel. Nakht looked down at the darkened strip of sand. Too dry, Penray said. And the sand piles up before the runners. Too wet, and it becomes troublesome in another way. Done properly, it eases the pull. Nakht nodded slowly. This he understood. He was a farmer. Soil changed with water. Mud, dust, packed ground, loose ground, each behaved differently beneath a foot, a cart, a tool. The work here was unfamiliar, but the principle was not magic. It was observation. That comforted him. At Penray's call, the men leaned forward together. The first effort produced only strain. Nakht felt the rope harden in his hands, and every muscle in his back answered with alarm. Again, said Penray. The second pull brought a sound like a groan from the wood beneath the block. Then, with a long, rough scrape, the sledge began to move. The whole crew adjusted at once. Feet dug in, bodies leaned. The rope vibrated. Men exhaled in rhythm. The block advanced. Nakht understood immediately why timing mattered. If one man slipped, the line broke. If the line broke, the load jerked. And if the load jerked, danger multiplied. By mid-morning, his palms were burning. By noon, small tears had opened in the skin despite the cloth wrapping. Yet no one around him complained much. The older workers conserved words just as they conserved effort. They knew when to shift grip, when to rest weight into the rope, when to ease forward on a slope, when to tighten together, during a pause. Nakht sat in the sliver of shade beside the sledge and drank water. A man named Hori, older than most and narrow-faced, sat beside him. You're from the south? Hori asked. Yes. Good shoulders, Hori said. Village work? Fields. Some building. Irrigation channels. Hori nodded. Then you already know half of this place. Nakht looked at him. How? Because this place is not only stone. It is grain, water, rope, timing, counting, waiting, and doing the same task correctly many times. Nakht smiled. That sounds like farming. Exactly. Later that day, he saw the work from a higher path and understood the site more clearly. Teams hauled blocks. Others shaped stone with copper tools and stone pounders. Others carried water, rope, wooden beams, baskets of food, baskets of rubble. Donkeys arrived with supplies. Scribes marked deliveries. Overseers directed traffic where paths crossed. The project was not one giant action. It was thousands of small actions linked together. Once, near midday, a team on another route had trouble when a sledge shifted unevenly. Men shouted. The crew leader halted the line, and the workers nearest the runners moved quickly to stabilize the load with levers and chocks. No one laughed. No one stared idly. These moments demanded attention. Afterward, Penray gathered Nakht's crew and said, That is why no man daydreams near a moving block. There was no drama in his tone, only the authority of experience. By the end of the day, Nakht's shoulders trembled from fatigue. His hands looked older. The muscles in his legs felt as if they belonged to someone else. Yet he had learned more in one day than he expected to learn in a month. He had learned that ropes were checked constantly, that paths were prepared, not improvised, that water was carried not only for drinking, but also for the ground, that each crew depended on another. Quarrymen, haulers, bakers, scribes, boatmen, herdsmen, rope makers, potters. He had also learned that men talked while they worked, not endlessly, but enough to make the labor human. One man cursed a donkey that behaved like a nobleman. Another claimed his wife could out-argue every overseer in Egypt. Hori told a story about a village goose that had chased a tax collector into a canal. Even Penray smiled at that one. When Nakht returned to the settlement at dusk, he expected only exhaustion. Instead, he found surprise waiting again. Near the food area, bread was being turned out in quantity from conical molds. A line of men carried grain sacks towards storage. Nearby, fish was being cleaned. Farther off, he saw an animal enclosure and heard someone say that cattle had arrived for butchering. This was no wandering camp. It was a managed town. At supper, Nakht held his bowl and listened to the conversations around him. Men spoke of crews, loads, deliveries, villages, and home, but also of numbers: how many blocks had come from one place, how many were delayed from another, how many men were needed on a given route. He was beginning to understand something important. A pyramid did not rise by force alone. It rose because someone, somewhere, had learned how to organize almost everything. That night, before sleep, Nakht touched the torn skin of his palm and smiled despite himself. The work was hard, but it was not senseless, and that made all the difference. After 10 days at Giza, Nakht stopped thinking of the workers' settlement as temporary. It had walls, rhythm, routines, and expectations like any town. In some ways, it was more ordered than the village he had left behind. He began to see its shape not as a newcomer, but as a resident. At dawn, bakeries came alive first. Grain from royal stores was ground and mixed. Bread molds were set near ovens. Fuel was managed carefully. Jars moved from hand to hand. Men and women assigned to provisioning worked with the same seriousness as hauling teams. Because without food, there would be no labor to direct. Nakht took a new interest in meals, not because he was greedy, but because he could not help comparing this life with home. Here, bread came regularly. Beer was not celebration only. It was nourishment. Sometimes there were onions, dried fish, or other additions. At certain times, meat appeared, and whenever it did, the camp's mood lifted at once. One evening, Hori sat across from him and said, "You're thinking again. How do you know? You stare at bread as if it has spoken." Nakht laughed. At home, we spend half our lives worrying whether there will be enough. Here, everything depends on whether enough reaches us. That is true everywhere, Hori replied. Only here you can watch the whole chain. He was right. Nakht could watch grain arrive, be measured, stored, processed, baked, and distributed. He could see how the king's project fed its workers, and how the workers, in turn, fed the project with labor. He also began to notice the people who did not haul stone, but were just as essential. Scribes with pallets tucked under the arm, potters shaping vessels for storage and transport, carpenters repairing sledges, rope makers checking fibers, men responsible for water and animal care, medics treating strained backs, split fingers, swollen joints. The medics impressed him most. In his village, injury was simply part of life and often endured in silence. Here, because labor had to continue, injuries were observed carefully. Hands were wrapped, shoulders were massaged with oil, splints were applied. Men with serious harm were removed from hauling lines before they endangered themselves or others. One afternoon, after a long pull up a prepared incline, Nakht felt a sharp catch in his side and went to the treatment area, embarrassed by the idea of reporting such a thing. The medic, an older woman with a practical face and little patience for pride, pressed the muscles near his ribs. "You farmers," she said, always think pain is a private matter. Nakht winced. Is it not? Not when it alters how you move. If you change your balance, the man beside you pays for it. She rubbed oil into the tight muscle and bound his midsection. There, return tomorrow and sleep properly. How does one sleep properly in a room full of snoring men? Nakht asked. She shrugged. Become more tired. That night, back in the galleries, the men shared stories of home more freely than before. The first awkwardness among strangers had passed. Nakht now knew who missed his children, who claimed to miss only his dog, who was terrible at dice, who pretended not to sing and sang loudly anyway after beer. One of the younger workers, Baki, I had never seen Memphis and kept asking questions of anyone who had. Is it true the officials there wear more linen in one day than my family owns in a year? Yes, said Hori. Is it true there are boats bigger than houses? Some houses, said Hori. Is it true scribes can ruin a man without lifting anything heavier than a brush? At this, everyone laughed. The settlement itself changed with the seasons and with deliveries. Sometimes more boats arrived, sometimes more stone. Sometimes entire groups rotated out, and new men took their places. Nakht began to understand that the pyramid workforce was not a single unmoving body. It breathed, it shifted, it was replenished. News came in fragments, a shipment delayed, a canal route improved. A team from Tura had sent fine limestone. A crew chief had won praise for efficiency. A work gang had named itself after the king in a way that amused everyone. Nakht listened closely whenever boatmen were mentioned. Their work interested him now. Stone had to come not only from nearby quarries, but from farther places too. Someone cut it, someone loaded it, someone counted it, someone shipped it, someone received it, someone recorded it, someone hauled it onward. The pyramid was becoming, in his mind, less like a single structure and more like the center of a vast web. On one rare rest afternoon, Nakht climbed a low rise beyond the settlement and looked back. From there he could see the workers' town, the movement of men and animals, storage buildings, ovens, work areas, and beyond them the rising monument itself. It struck him then that future generations might look at the pyramid and imagine only the king. They would see height, stone, perfection, command. They might never imagine bread ovens. They might never imagine sore hands, jokes in the dusk, arguments over ration bowls, a medic scolding a laborer, a carpenter cursing warped wood, a boy from the Delta learning to haul beside a farmer from the South. They might not imagine the town at all. When he said this later to Hori, the older man chewed slowly and answered, "That is how monuments work. They make one name large and many names small." Nakht looked down at his bowl. "Then why do you stay?" Hori smiled. "Because small names still need bread. And because, now and then, a small name helps make something that lasts." Nakht said nothing for a while. Then he looked toward the dark outline of the pyramid against the evening sky. For the first time, he did not see only labor there. He saw memory. By the time the season turned, Nakht could tell the hour by the color of the stone. In early morning, it held a quiet grayness. By midday, it became almost too bright to look at. Toward evening, it softened again, and the edges of the pyramid seemed less harsh, as if the monument were willing, for a brief while, to belong to the same world as ordinary people. Nakht had now been at Giza long enough for habits to settle into him. He no longer woke confused. His hands had thickened. He knew where to stand on the rope. He knew which crews sang under strain and which preferred silence. He knew how to save strength on a long pull and how to spend it when it mattered. He also knew he would not remain here forever. Some men stayed longer than others. Some rotated home after a period of service. Some returned in later seasons. A royal work was never only one moment in one year. It drew people in and sent them out again. When a new group arrived from villages farther south, Nakht found himself doing for them what others had once done for him. "Wrap your hands better," he told one. "Don't look only at the block. Watch the path," he told another. "To Hall." "Well, listen more than you speak," he told a third. Baki heard this and grinned. "Now you sound like Penray," Nakht laughed. "Then perhaps I am becoming old." Not old," said Hori. "Useful." That, Nakht had discovered, was one of the highest compliments a man could earn on the plateau. One morning, Penray chose Nakht and several others to assist on a route where finely cut casing stones were being moved. The work demanded more care than brute strength. Every surface mattered. Chips and damage mattered. Alignment mattered. As Nakht walked beside one of the gleaming white stones from Tura, he ran his fingers lightly across its face when no overseer was looking. It felt cool and astonishingly smooth. "This," said Penray quietly, noticing him, "is what people will remember." Nakht glanced at him. The outer stone? The finish, the shine, the thing that makes men stare. And what will they not remember? Penray looked toward the hauling path behind them, where rougher blocks waited, where men carried water, where bakers worked in heat, where scribes bent over accounts. "The rest?" he said. They walked in silence for a time. Then Nakht replied, "But the rest is what holds it up." Penray gave him a brief nod, as if satisfied by the answer. That evening, the settlement was lively. A fresh delivery of cattle had reached the site, and the prospect of meat had improved everyone's mood. Men spoke louder. Someone sang. Someone else insisted on correcting the song. Baki claimed that once he returned home, he would tell everyone he had become an expert in royal architecture. Hori informed him that he had become an expert only in carrying things other men had designed. Later, sitting just outside the barracks, Nakht looked up at the stars. At home, the sky had always belonged to the fields, the river, and the dark shape of palm trees. Here it belonged also to geometry, measurement, and orientation. Men at Giza did not simply pile stone. They aligned, counted, checked, corrected. Order was part of the monument's meaning. He thought of his son. Would Teti remember him as a farmer who left for a season? As a father who returned with calloused hands and stories? As a man who had stood beside Khufu's pyramid while it was still becoming itself? Or would the memory blur, as most lives did, into work, family, aging, and silence? A few weeks later, Nakht's crew was granted rotation home. The news spread through the barracks with a mix of joy and hesitation. Men longed for home, yet leaving the site felt strange too, as if stepping away from a great machine that would continue without noticing. On his final morning, Nakht walked once more to a rise overlooking the settlement and the pyramid. The monument was far from complete, yet already it commanded the horizon. Around it, the town worked on, ovens hot, crews forming, jars moving, animals being led, ropes coiled, instructions given, names recorded. So many lives inside one undertaking. He thought then that future people might ask the wrong question. Not, how was it built, though that mattered. Not even, who ordered it, though that too mattered. But what kind of world could gather grain, stone, wood, rope, water, skill, and thousands of people into one sustained purpose? That, he felt, was the true wonder. When he reached his village days later, Teti ran to him at once. Henut stood in the doorway, smiling in a way she had not smiled when he left. Her mother looked at his hands first and nodded approvingly, as if the calluses themselves were proof of honest service. At supper, while the family listened, Nakht tried to describe the pyramid. He failed. Not because he lacked words, but because the monument was not only a thing to be seen, it was bread ovens, hauling paths, shouted rhythm, tired laughter, measured grain, wet sand, smooth limestone, careful records, and the repeated effort of men who would never have their names cut into the finished stone. In the end, he told Teti this: "When people speak of the king, they will speak of the pyramid. But when I look at it, I will also remember the town beside it and all the people who made it possible." Teddy considered this with the seriousness children reserve for sentences they will understand fully, only years later. "Will it stand forever?" he asked. Nakht looked toward the north, though the pyramid was far beyond sight. "No," he said at last. "Nothing made by people stands forever." Then he smiled. "But some things stand long enough to be remembered."